Hello and welcome back to the second episode of the TRB In-Lap Podcast. This one, of course, covering the mesmeric Sebring 12 which took place yesterday. I'm still a little bit sleep deprived, although I might add that I did fall asleep with around an hour and a half to spare and only woke up for the final 5 minutes with John Hindhaugh shouting in my ears. But anyway, disclaimers aside, a fantastic race indeed, and I want to begin this podcast by saying thank you to everyone who listened to the first edition, the first podcast I've ever done, and that my co-creator / evil genius sidekick Michael Haffenden has ever done. So we were very happy that everyone seemed to enjoy it and really get stuck in. 40% of you, in fact, listened to it all the way through, and for a podcast that was nearing on 2 hours, that's pretty impressive that you parted with that amount of time to listen to us talk about some race cars going round and round in circles. So thank you very much for listening to that first episode, and I hope you enjoy this second episode. As always, and I say as always as if this has been going on for years, I am joined by my good friend and TRB premium subscription holder, Michael Haffenden. Michael, first of all, how long did it take you before you fell asleep? I know you haven't been feeling too great. And what did you think? Opening comments on the Sebring 12
First of all, good afternoon. It's Sunday afternoon as we record this, and we're both feeling fairly sleep deprived, must add, which is quite amazing considering last time it was a 24-hour race. And the week before the Rolex 24, we'd done the iRacing Rolex 24 Hours of Daytona. So we should really have been feeling a lot more tired for that. But for some reason, life has caught up with us this week. I haven't been feeling great this week. So I must admit, I also fell asleep slightly early. The last thing I saw through weary eyes was that soon became very lit up eyes in surprise was the number 24 BMW erupting into flames at a pit stop. So that woke me up. I called it a night shortly after that. But it was, as always, just fantastic. I mean, Sebring is just, what a circuit. It's already iconic, obviously, but it's one of those things that is just so unchanged year to year that you just, it builds that character because that, they haven't changed the surface here, or this corner's not quite the same, or this curb's different. You know what to expect from it, and it's always constant action and just a absolute car beater, as well as being really tough for the drivers. So it's got all the perfect ingredients, and then you add IMSA, which is just brilliant in its own right at any circuit. So I really, really enjoyed the 10 hours and 15 minutes that I did watch.
Well, I think the best thing I really enjoyed was, okay, racing was great, but wasn't it nice to have 4 months between the previous edition and this edition? If that's the one good thing that comes out of COVID, is that we've had, this little delayed end of the season, and now we've got all the races again pretty soon. It feels like the previous edition happened only a couple of weeks ago. I can remember that very well. And again, I did fall asleep with about 65 minutes to spare on that one as well. So same rhythm, but so let's get cracking then. We're going to go class by class. We're going to, as we did before, felt like that seemed to work in terms of a format for us trying to decipher what is it's just jam-packed, isn't it, these IMSA races, regardless of whether they're 12, 24 or 2 hours, 40 minutes. So class by class, we're going to dive in on any fun topics and conversations that arise from that. And before we get started, before we jump off the cliff into the IMSA abyss, to those of you listening, if you want to hit follow, like, subscribe, whatever button there is, and let us know what you think of this episode, and sit back, enjoy the next however long it takes for us to make sense of this stuff. So let's kick things off with our favourite class, the class that all the action seems to happen in, and the one that the cameras and commentators keep up with the most, which is the LMP3 class. We need some kind of jingle, don't we, in the background?
Yeah, we do. We really do.
So, quick points just to get us started before we probably... I feel like we're doing it a disservice because there probably is some exciting stuff and stories happening, but it doesn't get the airtime. But Core Autosport winning, John Bennett, Colin Brown and George Kurtz in the number 54 Ligier, and was thinking, John Bennett and Colin Brown, they're two names we have always associated with PC cars, haven't we? With the old Chevy FLM 09, whatever those fun boxes were. And I was thinking, right, so the second gen PC as it is now, LMP3.
PC 2.0.
Okay, Core Autosport used to win quite a bit back then. Now they won the race at the weekend on the first LMP3 IMSA appearance at Sebring, only to realise that the duo, Bennett and Braun, have won at the 12 hours twice in PC cars and went on to win 2 PC championships. So seems like business as usual in the middling prototype class. But then the 91 and 74 Riley cars rounding out the podium, and as always, the awkward drama on track seemed to fall around P3 cars dropping it here or there. I was quite happy to see a few occasions where there was a car off on the grass, not having the yellow flag waved, and us going to caution for a car that managed to find its way back on track. So I felt like there maybe wasn't the negative influence that this middling class could potentially have had at a track like Sebring, where you don't have the overtaking opportunities as such like you do at Daytona. But quick thoughts, if any, Haff, on the LMP3 race?
Not many thoughts to add of any real any real valuable insight here. But what I will say is, I think everyone's doing the class a little bit of a disservice with how much of maybe a meme it's becoming. It's great for the competitors to have that prototype challenge type feel to it. And it's a class that we all sort of welcomed when we heard the announcement, but in reality it is because, and I think almost IMSA is a law unto itself in this regard, because there is so much going on in all the other categories, or at least in DPI and GTLM and GTD, that there's almost, it's too much to keep track of. I know you and I were sat on a Discord call for the majority of yesterday with the timing screen up, really trying to figure out what was happening in P3, but inevitably getting distracted by other things. So I think if IMSA was really, really struggling, which at a point last year we really welcomed the news of LMP3 because it would mean a greater grid, basically, which we sort of all thought, all right, I mean, I'm not sure how this is going to work out, but it will be good to see more cars on the grid, because we all love multi-class racing, regardless of how it works in real life, which isn't always the best sort of thing. As we've seen, PC used to get in the way a lot of GTLM battles, and I think in the first 15 minutes of the race, it wasn't even just the stragglers in LMP3, it was pretty much the majority of the class getting eaten up. And obviously will be circuit dependent, but at a track like Sebring, which is very quick in places, but also has a lot of bumps which unsettle a little prototype like that, and cars which have a lot more mechanical grip are always going to come off a corner quicker, or can carry a bit more speed or have a bit more confidence in the early laps. It does turn into a bit of a headache to watch. But like I say, maybe it's something that if we were involved in it, and if we were an LMP3 team competing in it, it might be brilliant. There might be some great stories in there that we just don't really get to hear about, because everything else is so blooming cool and there's so much going on all the time. Yeah. So that was your LMP3 update, which told you nothing about what happened in the race.
Well,
Sorry,
I think to add to your point, you got to think these cars are made to be sold and run by people who are maybe not professional racing drivers. They're cars that they're not super factory built, wind tunnel engineering, brain box tested machines. They are baby prototypes for people who want to go racing to buy and run. And a race like Sebring, where it's so hectic and these cars are really just surviving to some extent, I feel, in amongst the craziness, that it's just the nature that they'd get lost in amongst factory teams and this pro driver here and this big name here and whatever. So, but once again, great to have them. Like you say, I think we're going to have to change the phrase greater good now to greater grid, which you just came up there. So if ever, I think the GTD Pro changes for the greater grid as well. So, we've got to start. We'll get that in #greater grid if you're listening along. So we'll skip on to the next category, which is LMP2. So the slightly bigger prototypes. PL1 Matterson Motorsport picking up the win. Ben Keating, Scott Huffaker and Mikkel Jensen, obviously soon to be Peugeot hypercar driver, proving his value in a P2. Again, I felt like the LMP2 battle was overshadowed by the other classes. But from the race that we had, the real big talking point was Timothy Bourret's incident within the final 3 hours. And I know you and I were watching that at the time, and we were shocked at just how violent an incident it was. Turn 1 at Sebring, not a slow corner anyway, but something about that crash was pretty spectacular. And to see Bourret, obviously a youngish prototype driver, out there proving his value in the North American Championship, to walk away from a crash like that was pretty... that someone was looking out for him, I think, with a hit like that. Yeah,
we had a lot of heavy hits thinking about it yesterday, didn't we? They were fairly spaced out. It wasn't the usual sort of breed cautions that we're used to hearing in IMSA broadcasts, but there were fairly regular, sort of every 2.5 hours, some heavy shunts. Obviously, we had the Lamborghini and the Mercedes in GTD. And like you mentioned, Bourret's incident there, and I think it's worth noting that we were really, really quite surprised at the pace of that car relative to the DPI, which was trying to lap it must have been around 5 or 10 minutes before when Scott Dixon was in the 01 Cadillac. And we were really saying, wow, they must have a really quick driver on board this 8 LMP2 car, because it's keeping up. And it's keeping the 01 at bay, which he
didn't have an easy time getting past, did he, Dixon?
No,
exactly.
He
looked for it a few times around the course of a lap, and Bourret, not through blocking or through, dangerous or unsportsmanlike driving, was just keeping ahead of the fastest car out on track. It was pretty spectacular, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. And it was one of those things where you thought, well, he's really pedaling whoever's on board that car. I remember you checking the timing screens to show that it was Bourret. But yeah, that was a heavy hit. And there were a few incidents yesterday which really sort of made us wince a little bit when we first saw them. You actually called it pretty much straight away and said, I think that car's rolled over, because we were trying to sort of determine from the tyre marks and the sort of trajectory it had taken into the barriers. I remember pointing out that some of the tyres had flipped over the barrier and gone quite far onto the infield of the circuit as well. So that was something which was like, this is a big shunt. And then obviously we saw the replays, and amazing to see him walking away from that. And also very lucky that the car sort of landed back on all 4 wheels again, because it could have been one of those awkward things, because there were so many tyres everywhere that he may have got trapped in it if it had been at an awkward angle. So a bit of a blessing in that respect. But yeah, turn 1 really caught some people out. Yesterday, we obviously saw the incident between the 2 Cadillacs, with the 31 collecting, what was the number, Tim? Exiting
the 5. It was the eventual race winner.
See, I nearly said the 5, then I thought, that can't be right, because they had so many dramas, so many setbacks, which I'm sure we'll get back onto later in the podcast. But it was a real action point, turn 1, and specifically the big, large bump on the exit of turn 1, which was just unsettling drivers when they were really, really almost at their most committed, or at least at the most committed point beyond the apex.
So it's almost there. That part of the track is where they're coming off what is the runway, the former military base runway that has made Sebring what it is, I suppose. And then they're transitioning onto what is racetrack. It's a road, former, just a service road to the airbase. There is that transition point, and I don't want to know if it's something to do with the surface, how it's degraded over time. But there was a sizable, the cars transferring. You could see the back end of these cars getting airtime almost, and we saw it in some of the support races. We saw it in qualifying where drivers were properly pedaling, that they were getting over this bump, and it was just sending them. But the Beret incident, the way he comes into turn one, he's on an outlap. I think that was something crucial to bring into it as well. He obviously was pushing very hard at the end of the stint when he was giving Dixon a headache. Then he was obviously making up time. He was on it outlap, first time into T1 on cold tyres. No tyre warmers in the IMSA series if you're a new follower of the championship. Comes into T1. And from the camera angle we got to see on the replay, it just didn't look like that car was slowing down. And an incident like that at somewhere like Copse, I remember we said this at the time, somewhere like Copse at Silverstone or even at Pouhon at Spa, quick corners, there's just the acres of runoff, which in some cases are blissful and, you know, they're fantastic in what they do. But a circuit like Sebring, there's no margin for error anyway, even if you're in control of a car, let alone when you're flying through the first corner at 150 miles an hour backwards, not knowing where you're going. And I think something that stood out to me was the tyre barriers and the concrete walls behind them. Is it time that we start thinking about Sebring needing an upgrade? And is it time, you know, we saw I don't want to talk about it because I want to bring more attention to it, that Jalopnik article about Sebring needs a repave and all that. But is there some element of truth in now with the speeds that the cars are at, the future of racing with LMDH and hypercars, which I know are going to be slightly slower, but with this whole next period of endurance racing, is it time you look at a circuit like Sebring and go, let's just give it a little bit further, a nudge into the modern day? Not saying ruin it, but you know, does an incident like Beret's crash and indeed the GTD crash that we saw with the Allegra Motorsport Mercedes and the GRT Lamborghini, is it time that Sebring gets a little kick towards 2021?
Well, I suppose I sort of opened my my first bit of chatting on the podcast today was chatting about how it's amazing that the circuit hasn't lost character over the years. But I do agree that I think it needs some sort of boost, whether that's implementing safer barriers around the circuit so that when we do have incidents and after we have incidents, the marshals not having to do a sort of bish bash bosh, watching it back together sort of job that we were almost laughing at, because it was like, is that really safe? The concrete's been moved back a lot and a lot of the catch fencing's a bit bent now. Like if a car has a similar sort of incident, that's probably not going to be nearly as effective. So it was definitely a case of thinking, this is a bit on the edge. And I'm not sure what happened with the Lamborghini and Mercedes crash at turn 2, but it certainly didn't look like a natural sort of incident. And Franck Pereira doesn't seem to be the sort of driver who's going to have that sizable of an accident at a point where you don't really see cars lose it on the brakes. So my inkling is something went wrong on that car. And suspension failures or the like are very likely to happen at a track like Sebring. A lot of the teams, I remember from sort of Audi Truth in 24 days, them saying that running the 12 hours at Sebring is like running a 36-hour test at Paul Ricard, or, you know, it's harder on a car than running the full race at Le Mans or Daytona. So it's obviously one which is testing the cars to the limit. And it just worries me that if that Lamborghini had had something go wrong at another point in the track, maybe through sunset or, you know, a really high, even if it just happened at turn 1 as well, it does worry me a little bit that, you know, maybe we're pushing our luck here, because we've seen plenty of incidents and we've also seen just how difficult it is for first timers at this track. Insert Jimmy Johnson memes here, but even in qualifying, he lost it coming through Le Mans curve and then tried to get back on it to get back round to start another flying lap and dropped it at the final corner. So it's very easy to make mistakes, especially when you're under pressure. And even things like the Durrani incident, when he was going side by side for the lead very early in the race and he absolutely clattered the inside wall at sunset. It's things like that, which is, you know, the stuff that we love, the risk of like flying between concrete barriers and sending it over bumps, like all the stuff which makes Sebring spectacular. But it is also the stuff which makes you think, oh, are we pushing our luck a little bit here? But what do you think, Tim? Do you think it's due an upgrade, and in what area would you like to see change, if so?
For me, I think Sebring needs mild modifications. At heart, yeah, I'm a purist. I hate seeing the iconic tracks get butchered and bludgeoned into an era of racing that they never thought they might even exist into or would even exist, But I think it's only I hate to to verbalize this, but I think it's only a matter of time before an incident is something, a grave incident happens when you think about how quick these cars are going, how hard they're pushing, the nature of the circuit, the bumps, the stresses. Not only that pushes the drivers to their limits, like we say, these guys are getting beaten up in those conditions, but also what they do to the cars. The GRT incident, it looked like it had some sort of suspension, brake failure, whatever at the rear. That is a modern race car, pretty much brand new. Is that Lamborghini Evo, Huracan, whatever, and that can't hack it. And it's not even after 12 hours. It's only halfway through the race that something like that's happening. I don't think that there's justification to repave Sebring, but I think there is room for amendments. I'm going to classify it as, because I think turn one is definitely five layers of tires just seems so lackluster compared to the yards of tech pro barriers that line circuits. To think that this race, the Sebring 12 hours, will become an international race again once WEC is able to go back, and especially when you've got, hopefully, LMDH and hypercar manufacturers hopping between events and races, whatever. Five layers of tires, old recycled tires, stapled together, strapped together with absolute rocket ships of cars. I don't know, it just doesn't feel right, and it feels like there's an opportunity for something to go very wrong. And I would hate to think, look, the way of looking at it is better make the change now before you look back going, oh, we should have done that.
Yeah, be proactive. Be proactive. Rather than reactive.
And I don't think it would take too much to really iron out those creases that make Sebring a question mark in terms of modern day safety. I'm not saying butcher the thing. I think there is those things, barriers, maybe leveling off a bump here and there. I'm not saying flatten the place, because that would just ruin it. I don't know. Personally, I think there's little changes that would go a long way to stop an incident again like Barade, because he did get lucky, in my opinion, and so did the corner workers and the fans that are not too far away, where tyres were flung into the air. Wouldn't take much more for that to be a part of the car getting launched. I wouldn't go as far to say it's a massive wake-up call, but it's definitely something that now, because of that incident, I think needs to be spoken about, and because of the GTD incident, of course. But again, feel like we're doing disjustice. We're not doing justice, to a category that probably had a spectacular race, but really it's 12 hours were categorised by, really that incident was the talking point, I think. That's probably just you and I's fault for falling asleep, or for being too caught up in cheering on the GT battles and the DPI battle at the front. But yeah, I think some talking points still come from their race. So should we skip on to category number 3, GTD? Let's get started before the weekend, which is the announcement of the new qualifying format, and then its implementation on Friday afternoon. For those who are new to IMSA racing and to the GTD category, for 2021, qualifying is scoring points across all 5 classes. So however well you do in qualifying, you get some points, championship points for it. But in GTD, where in the driver lineup there is typically a pro driver and an AM driver, now the ruling is the AM driver in a 15-minute session sets the time to set the grid, and then another 15-minute session, the pro driver gets the car and they can score championship points. So both drivers in the lineup have value, have a responsibility to the session and to the team's weekend ahead. Your thoughts on the new format, Mike? I personally think it's a great addition.
Yeah, I know going into the weekend we were chatting about it because you were very excited to see it. I think it's a great idea. Traditionally, maybe it's something that has been a little bit of a sticking point when you do have a pro-am category to think, okay, like how do we make the pros and the ams really like show us what they can do over a lap, because that's what we want to see in qualifying. That's what we all want to see, is cars absolutely going for it, low fuel, chucking the thing around and trying to produce the best lap time. That's what qualifying is all about. And yes, qualifying maybe doesn't have the same onus in a 12-hour race as it would for the shorter 2-hour 40-minute races. But at the same time, we say all these old school sort of qualifying doesn't matter and whatnot, and then it comes to race day, and it's basically a sprint race anyway. Each stint by stint sprint race is another endurance cliche, I know, but everyone's going flat out all the time essentially. So why not have, just because qualifying isn't going to determine the outcome of your race because it's an endurance race doesn't mean that qualifying has to be some subdued event. I think we should make it a bit more of a celebration. So I didn't actually get to see qualifying live, but I did catch up with it, and I think it's a really cool thing. And like you said, sort of it highlights what the pros and the AMs can do, and gives a class which, the pro-am element should be celebrated. That's part and parcel of GTD at the minute. So why not enjoy that? But I know you were very excited to see it.
Yeah.
So did it live up to your expectations?
It did and it didn't. It did in the sense that it was great to see the AM driver used for a reason beyond just trying to get their driver time done, because so often now it's been the AM driver qualifies the car so that they can start the race, then we'll get there however long they need to do done and sealed and ticked off, then we'll get the pro driver in and they will decide our result. I don't like this idea of the AM driver being the burden, because they're so important now, because the pros are all roughly at the same level. It's actually down to the AM driver's performance now to decide that result. So I like seeing this emphasis on, look guys, you need to do this because you're setting the grid time. I don't know, it felt like there was a bit more onus on the AM driver doing a good job. But then, nicely, we got to see these GT3 cars having their necks truly wrung by the pro drivers, which is something we've missed out on for a while now in this GTD category. My only problem was, and obviously you didn't watch this live, Mike, so you might not have seen, but the GTD pro driver session happened at the same time as GTLM quali. So you had the GTLM cars and the GTD cars on track at the same time. Now, for me, that really broke up the emphasis on this new session, because all you had in the build-up was, okay, we've got the AM driver in now, then the pro's going to get in. Oh, Zak Robishon's in the Haff car, he's going to hand it over to Lawrence Vanthoor. Oh, yeah, Rob Ferrial's out on track, Earl Bamber's going to be taking it over. And then you got into the pro session and all the GTLM cars are out on track, and then you're trying to look all the way up and down the timing screen, and it's difficult for everyone to keep on top of what's going on. I feel like that messed things up a bit for me, because it sounded like it was just going to be two separate sessions. We were going to have an additional session of qualifying. So not a perfect introduction of the new rules in my personal opinion, but nonetheless excited to see it implemented, and hopefully going forward we'll see maybe some changes, or these issues just ironed out. I think it was new for everyone.
The final point of the GTD qualifying, a comment I saw on the Racing Blog's Instagram, I'm not sure who it was, so if you're listening, apologies, I've forgotten your name, but a comment which I thought was very true and a nice way of looking at it was, IMSA didn't have to introduce a new sort of qualifying format, and they're trying to bring something new for fans and trying to perfect what is already something which is pretty exciting. So fair play to IMSA. And I thought that comment was quite a nice way of looking at it. Obviously, like you said, it wasn't implemented perfectly, but I like the TRB community mentality.
Yes, thank you.
Let's give things a good go.
Yeah, thank you, random commenter, whoever you were. We'll endeavour to make it your worthwhile. But moving forward to the GTD race as a whole, the team I just mentioned, the number 9 Haff Motorsports Porsche, winning, taking a fantastic victory, their first major win as a team in the IMSA WeatherTech United Sports Car Championship. And I've got a great little stat for you that I'll throw it your way, Mike, which I believe really backs up just how good a performance they had yesterday. Of the 294 laps completed by the GTD class, the winning Haff car, 147 of those are in the lead, which is exactly half the race. So they led for 6 hours, obviously chopped up across the event, but that's a pretty dominant performance in what is the closest category on the grid.
Oh, massively, yeah. It was. I know we just spoke about how qualifying doesn't matter too much, and I think in an endurance race, and the Haff car really proved that. Got a great getaway, and yeah, it was pretty much a bit of a dream run for them, really.
What a performance from the Haff car! Like you say, Robishon at the start doing a great job to get the car off the line well, considering he had an ABS failure in qualifying, had his quickest laps ruined by running wide at Tower Corner twice in consecutive lap times, starting on the back row with the GRT car that lost pole position for having a Wi-Fi hotspot in the car. I don't even know what to say about that. But yeah, it proves that qualifying isn't everything, but you do need a well-oiled team to make it through to the end of an endurance race, let alone perform in the way they did.
Yeah, definitely. I think that car's been a fan favourite, probably because of the brilliant livery on it, which is sort of unlike anything that we've really seen before, and it's just so distinctive. So it's a really nice looking car, and the lineup that they've got now is just working really nicely for them. It's taken them to another level, obviously having Van Tour in the car. I know his stint was one that sort of set the car apart when some of the AM drivers were in their respective cars. Like we had De Angelis in the Heart of Racing Aston, I think, around the midpoint of the race, and we were keeping tabs on how much longer Van Tour was going into his stint, and also noticing from the onboard that he was lifting and coasting quite a lot to keep the right car and the Heart of Racing Aston behind him. And you just got the sense that he was doing sorry, this is a fairly niche reference, but for anyone who's a British touring car fan, doing the Jason Plato sort of style of winning the race in the least amount of time. You don't have to pull a massive gap on your rivals. You just got to stay ahead and keep track position and do what you got to do. And he really used that first, I guess, well, what looked like the majority of the stint to us from the outside, but what was probably the first half of the stint in real terms, just to save a bit of fuel, run at a pace, maybe conserve his tyres a little bit. And then as soon as the others boxed around him, it was hammer time, and he was setting some amazing times, really gapping De Angelis, but also going deeper and deeper into the race. And that's what the pro's there to do, is to know when to push, know when to take risks in traffic, but also save a little bit here and there, just so they're strong at the end and in a good position. Because how many cars did we see that looked like the favourite in any class and then had an issue, or maybe gone for a move that they shouldn't have, or had some sort of drama which was probably avoidable? That's what's really boosting that Haff entry now, I think. And also, no discredit to the other drivers in that car. It takes a well-oiled team to not only win Sebring, obviously, but to have led that many laps, like you say. That's an incredible stat for them.
Well, I don't know if you can see it. Sorry for those playing along at home who obviously can't see us because they're listening to a podcast. But circled on my piece of paper, you can see there, Mr. Haff, is the words Van Tour's management of the race, which is exactly what you're talking about there.
We haven't actually gone through notes before this either, so we're on the same wavelength.
Yeah, so exactly, yeah. Well-oiled team here at the TRB In-Lap Podcast, one might say. But he... that lifting and coasting, that was really interesting because we got to ride on board with him for a little while, and that race management is exactly what Van Tour brings to that Haff team. He's not there just to go hammer and tongs at this Porsche GT3R, not just ditch everything out on the track, but know when to save his car for a little bit longer and maybe just withhold from pushing. Because like you say, when it was Trent Hinman, I believe, in the 16 right car behind, he had him under wraps. He knew what to do. Then the right car boxed, the Heart of Racing car boxed, and Vantor just went about setting some really strong times right at the end of a stint, which ended up being over an hour, 20 minutes. I think that followed on from the sizable caution after the Allegro Motorsport GRT crash. So a great race from him, a great race from Robishon as well at the start, a great race from Lars Kern as well, the third driver in that car, really doing exactly what he needs to do at crucial points, which is just lap fast. But a great day to be a Porsche fan, really, because Wright Motorsports, obviously winners of the 12 Hours 2020, coming home second place. Both these Porsches ending up at the back of the order early on because the Wright car taking a penalty for moving at the start. Jan Halen giving a bit of a block to the WeatherTech car off the start, the WeatherTech GTLM car, I might add, so the faster class. So both these cars coming through the order. Just like to add as well, so great to see Heart of Racing on the podium again. I think that team really means a lot to a lot of the fans. Besides the fact they are a team funding charity work outside of the racetrack, to see Ross Gunn, Roman DeAngelis, Ian James, this squad is becoming a bit of an Aston Martin backed venture, and it's easy to see why, because another podium at Sebring from what is it's a new team to the class, a relatively infant race last year, of course. It's brilliant, isn't it, to see an Aston Martin on the podium?
It's brilliant to see an Aston Martin in the class in general, I think. I'm always a big fan of a bit of variety, and I think if you're an endurance racing fan, then part of you is as well. Everyone likes to have that underdog story of, let alone, like you say, with the charity work which is going on with that team and the sort of message behind it, which is very endearing, and it's a very easy team to support because of that. I just love the whole, I hate to say the word vibe when we're talking about racing, but the whole vibe of GTD at the minute is just fantastic. I mean, it's been bubbling up for a few years, and that we've seen some amazing battles. So I'm not saying it's only just got great or as great as it is now. But equally, I really do think that it's sort of getting the limelight it deserves. You really saw at Daytona, it was pretty much the class to watch. Obviously, there was so much else going on, but it really was sort of, and I think maybe the GTD Pro announcement has given us that sort of extra oomph to really sit up and take notice of it. And we're all glad that we have, because we're now getting some amazing factory drivers in those cars, but also the AM element of it keeps it so interesting, because it is such a decisive factor just how quickly your AM can go, and whether he can keep up in a stint or whether he can keep out of trouble. It can make or break your race, and probably will. But yeah, fantastic to see that car on the podium. A very, very satisfying podium as a Porsche fan, and as a fan of sort of underdog entries, I guess. I know we've always sort of had a bit of a soft spot for the Wright car and the Pfaff car. So to have a podium like that is not only good objectively for the series, but also for the fans who 100%, there's a lot of fan favourite entries which have had a good run there. I would like to add that I was quite gutted for Lamborghini. I really thought that they had a good shot at it, and were sort of cruelly robbed of having a real go at it, which was sad to see, because like I said, it would be great to see the variety of more brands fighting at the front. Not that I don't think we had a good enough battle, but you know what I mean. It was just a bit of a shame to see. It's always a bit gutting as an endurance racing fan to see cars drop out through no fault of their own, really. I think we had a gearbox issue on one of the cars, and obviously we had the GRT car involved in that massive incident with the Allegro Motorsport Mercedes. So bit of a shame to see that, but all in all, another fantastic GTD race, and I'm sure that's going to become a klaxon moment for this podcast.
Great GTD race.
Because GTD is really where it's at the minute, isn't it? It's great.
Take a drink every time we say that the GTD class, something positive about the GTD class, and you'll be finding yourself absolutely battered. But yeah, to point out, just to back up your point, looking at the leader sequence across the race, obviously this dives and changes with pit stops, etc. We had, obviously, Porsches were leading at one point, Lexuses, BMWs, Lamborghinis, Acuras, Aston Martin, 6 brands leading the race at some point. What else needs to be said out of a grid that's maybe 13, 14 cars, that half of them have led the race at some point, if not more? So, yeah, it's fantastic. And the Mercedes as well, Allegra Motorsport, Daniel Morad doing a great job at the start. Lamborghini's leading, Corey Lewis, the Madsen Snow, Brian Sellers, the number 1 Lamborghini. I can't remember. Paul Miller Racing. There we go. Got it in the end.
Hey.
The one driver, I think, there were 2 sides to the coin for the Team Hardpoint EBM race. Obviously, the 88 and the 99. The 99, I believe, was the Catherine Legg and Christina Nielsen car. Now, I think that car really came through towards the end. And actually, I found out this morning, following my mild trip to the snooze land during the final 2 hours, that Catherine Legg was actually on for a podium in that car at the time, towards the end of the race. Yeah, they were in the 88, sorry. Before having a penalty for turning around the number 44 Magnus Acura. That car was nowhere at the start of the race, and then came through towards the end. Catherine Legg doing a stellar job to nearly back that team a podium. On the other side of the coin, I didn't think Earl Bamber had the best race in the 99 car, teammates with Rob Ferriel and the third driver, who was Estep, who's not a name I'm familiar with. But anyway, those 3 drivers eventually finishing in 10th in class, pretty far down the order. We saw that incident with Bamber running into the back of the Lamborghini at sunset. It just seemed a little bit of an amateur race from an amateur moment, I must say, from a driver we've come to expect so much from. I don't know what was quite going on there, but the hardpoint EBM cars didn't seem to be amazing in the Sebring 12 hours, besides that resurgent final 4 or 5 hours. It's a bit, maybe it's just a new program and there's creases to be ironed out, but I didn't think Earl Bamber's performance was going to be setting the world alight, which is a surprise. I must add that I'm only saying this because Earl Bamber's success has made us have such lofty expectations of him. I suppose I'm more shocked that I didn't see him further up the field.
Yeah, I think you're right in saying that maybe we haven't seen the best of this program yet. We definitely haven't. And yeah, it did seem like a bit of an unnecessary incident at sunset, but these things do happen. Drivers aren't always going to be on their A game, and Earl Bamber's obviously someone who's never going to do something like that deliberately or have an incident that's avoidable. So we didn't really get too many angles of that either. So I don't want to pass judgment on that too heavily, but I do know what you mean. It's not something that you expect from a driver of his caliber. And I do think that the lineups they have there, it's waiting. Their moment is yet to come, really. It might take them a few more races to get up to speed. Not really sure why it's not quite working at the minute, but maybe it is just those sort of teething issues and it's very early and it's in their development. But let's see. It's one of those things where it's like, it can be fairly cyclical in classes, teams having good races. I know we had sort of periods of Lexus domination last season, and it can ebb and flow with BOP and all that sort of stuff. But, the Porsches were very strong in GTD yesterday in the race. So maybe they'll rue it as a bit of a missed opportunity to not get that podium. But let's see. I feel like it has to, they have to have a bit of luck at some point, and they will come good as the season progresses.
Just before we move on to the GTLM category, which is our next area of discussion, just wanted to add about Zak Robishon. I'd written down in front of me, but forgot to mention. He was inside the top 15 in terms of drivers' fastest laps. So for an AM driver to be in amongst the pro boys in that category We say am, but that's a bit of a loose term considering how quick he was at the wheel of that number 9. So great to see him performing well, and indeed a lot of the drivers putting in stellar races in that category. So let's move on then to GTLM. If you're playing along at home, yes, count how many times we're going to say BMW or Corvette in this one, or BOP or straight line speed. But before we get on to maybe the more controversial aspects of yesterday's GTLM race, what a victory for WeatherTech Racing. We saw them punted it before the Daytona 24 had even started. We know that it's not the biggest operation. We know it's a car that's not even theirs. They're just borrowing it from Proton Competition to run. Also running, not a professional driver. Cooper McNeil, he's not... He doesn't have the qualities of an AM driver. He's very rapid when it comes to pedaling behind the wheel of a car. But to be the car that comes up top in that field, you've got to hand it to them. They did exactly what they needed to do yesterday, which was be there, and they were right there at the right time to really benefit from the instant and take victory. But that wasn't to say that they were out of the running at all.
Yeah, I've seen a few sort of things on Twitter saying, Corvette, we will get onto this incident, obviously, saying Porsche didn't really deserve it, or they just lucked into it or BMW handed Porsche the win. While yes, objectively, they won because of what happened further up the road, but it was just slightly further up the road, we might add. And you've got to be in it to win it. It's a cliche, but how many times have we seen sort of last lap or late in the race drama at Sebring over the years, where you just think maybe some drivers who've sort of, had incidents earlier in the race where they've maybe could have avoided it, or maybe just had a little bit more patience, just ruining their sort of luck, being like, why didn't we just stay in it? Because it all kicked off at the end. I know we had a lot of drama in DPI late in the race once the sun had set in November. Tensions really boiling over there from previous rounds, of course, but it really seems like a sort of race that lends itself to that drama towards the end. So fair play to them for keeping in it, and also fair play to Mathieu Jaminet for that avoiding action, because he could have so easily T-boned the BMW there, or got caught up with the Corvette, and also to sort of keep his cool even after he'd got through that mess, because the BMW was still hassling him and pushing and shoving even after that incident. So it could have been very easy to sort of lose focus. But I read an interview of Jaminet sort of quite confidently saying, I thought they were going to come together, because I could see them for laps going hammer and tong, and it seemed like something was going to kick off. And I know that's something we talk about a lot when we do sort of endurance sim racing, and one of us comes over the radio being like, I don't like the look of these guys, because you get that weird feeling when you're driving of the body language of the cars, just something not feeling quite right. And so often when you get that feeling, something does kick off, and you think, well, I could see that coming a mile off. And it sounds like Jaminet's like, it was easy, I could see it coming. He doesn't mean it like that. He means like, I wasn't gonna massively give it everything to try and send it on them, because had that feeling, which through years of racing probably stems from karting, to have that sort of foresight to realize these cars, the BMW's not content sitting in behind. And for a long time in the race, the BMWs were chasing. Even though they had a lot of pace, they didn't really seem to be the ones out front leading and sort of, controlling the race from the front. So I think there was a lot of frustration there. But yeah, fantastic story for WeatherTech to bring home that win. And what a lovely story for a privateer to win in GTLM as well. That's just, I know we've got a depleted class now, but the quality is still so high. And although it was fantastic effort from Corvette to fight back, because they had so much bad luck throughout the race, and it would have been great to see them win in a really nice story. We have seen Corvette win a lot in GTLM over the last year or so, so it's quite refreshing to see an underdog entry sort of take the win there. And also they were there on merit. There's no saying that at points in the race they were leading on merit, And there's no saying that they didn't deserve the win in my book. But yeah, fantastic to see that.
Yeah, of course. They are. I think that's something that's maybe not as well understood. When you look at the GTLM category, you just assume they're all factory teams because that is how GTLM has lent itself, and really what the formula is designed to be. It's designed to be a playground for factory teams in GT racing. Obviously, it's nice to see a small operation taking it to the big guns and winning, and winning pretty competitively. I think the last victory with a privateer team was Rizzi Competizione in their Ferrari. They're obviously a factory, and not a factory back team. Sorry, they're a customer team. No help, no money from Ferrari to help go racing. That's all self-funded. Petit Le Mans was their last victory, so great to see that happening. And there was a really interesting 2 hours of the race as the sun started setting. We were properly locked in to this because it was amazing to see the difference between how the Porsche 911 RSR 19 was generating the lap time at Sebring compared to the BMW M8, which, for want of a better phrase, was a rocket ship in a straight line. And we had Philip Eng doing his best to pass. I believe on the car at the time was Matty Campbell, but I'm willing to be proven wrong. And indeed, my memory isn't the best. But Campbell was doing a fantastic job of keeping that car ahead of Philip Eng, who was pulling some punches and trying to get past in the red 25 BMW, which was so quick in a straight line. And countless times, the Porsche did exactly what it needed to do on the exit of the previous corner, well in the knowledge that the BMW was going to be closing in those final few meters into the braking zone. And indeed, in fact, the second half really of the Ullman Straight, the back stretch, that BMW was absolutely rapid. Through the twisty stuff, though, the Porsche just looked like it had the edge. And how classic Porsche is that the German slightly rear-engined car is just so set and so stable through the twisty, bumpy sections of Sebring. I thought it was fun. If you needed two stints to watch to go, why is GT racing brilliant, and why is it that not every race needs a million overtakes to be exciting? You could watch that battle continue forever, and you wouldn't be disappointed in what you saw. I thought it made for some pretty exciting stuff in that final few hours.
Yeah, it was fantastic to watch. But it was probably the point in the race where we were most really glued to the screen as well. The sun came out finally after a day of quite flat lighting, and it was just stunning to watch. The battle was amazing again, and it's quite extraordinary that a class which unfortunately has so few entries now can still produce that level of just constant action, which just keeps us glued to it. And we all get slightly misty-eyed when someone reminds us of the fact that it won't be around forever, because you do forget that.
Don't say it.
Yeah, sorry guys. But you do get that feeling of like, why would this ever leave? Because it's so great still. And of course, I understand. We won't get into that. We chatted enough about it on the last podcast, but it was fantastic to watch. And your point on the strengths and weaknesses relatively around the lap, where the cars are producing lap time, but it's just a joy to watch. I mean, it's something that I really think a lot of forms of motorsport in the modern era are missing, is that sort of, this car's great in the corners, but the car behind it, you watch when we get straight, because it's going to be nipping right at the heels of the car in front. It's got the toe, and it generates that sort of, you can get on board with it because you can see what's going to happen to an extent, but you don't fully know what the outcome's going to be. And I remember you calling it when the BMW eventually did get past, because Campbell got caught up in traffic going onto the back straight, and you're like, Mike, this is it. This is the moment where he's going to get through. You watch, because we were on board with the GTD car. I can't remember which car it was.
The Heart of Racing car. I think it was the Aston.
I think you're right. Yeah, and you're like, here comes the Porsche, but the BMW is going to be right there as well, because the Porsche got balked coming on, but didn't get a good run onto the back straight. And we knew how quick the BMW had been. Right up at the end of the straight, it would sort of flash its lights and jink out of the slipstream just to say, I'm here and I'm quicker than you in this point of the track. Then the Porsche would be so sorted over the bumps. I don't think I've seen a GT car that well sorted over the bumps at Sebring ever. I can't remember. It looked glued to the track, which is something which you just do not say at Sebring. So it was fantastic to watch. I love that. The difference in strengths and weaknesses over a lap. That's just something, as an endurance racing fan, or just as a racing fan in general, you just lap that up because it keeps you so interested. And yeah, it was just brilliant to watch, wasn't it?
I think it was great because that moment you knew Eng had to get past, because that Porsche was not slowing down and had no intentions of reducing its pace or just making sure it held the position. You know, it was being wrung out, and that moment Philip Eng had to get the move done, which he did. Further down the line into the race, we saw Corvette's race was a bit of a mixed one. The number 4 fighting some sort of electrical power gremlin all throughout the race. The number 3 started on pole, dropped back, then came back through the order, then was leading in the final 8 minutes of the race. So let's address the elephant in the room here. Conor De Filippi's incident on the final few laps. BMW getting too punchy trying to win a race, or racing incident, or what was your reading of that talking point, which is really the talking point in the GTLM class post race?
It's a very difficult one to call, I think, because on the face of it, the BMW's wiped out the leading Corvette, and it's completely wrecked the Corvette's race, which they fought back so hard to win. But also, I don't think the incident itself was that malicious. He was fair. He was quite, well, basically, having not seen it live, I saw on Twitter a lot of talk about it and across social media that BMW, De Filippi shouldn't have his seat anymore. And I was thinking, oh my God, did he just deliberately wipe out the Corvette? So I was expecting a massive lunge, completely taking him out. It was a fairly remorseless reaction to just carry on while the Corvette's limping back and keep bumping the Porsche as well to try and keep the lead. I think we'd seen enough incidents which warranted drive-throughs in the race for De Filippi to know he's going to get a penalty for that. But at the same time, I'm not trying to back BMW's corner too much here, but he was pretty alongside, and it just looked like the front end sort of gave up and he understeered into the side of the Corvette, which I wasn't expecting to see at all, having heard the sort of scathing remarks about De Filippi's driving. What I will add, though, on the flip side of that, is I really don't think the BMW drivers helped themselves, and not just De Filippi, even when Eng was in the car chasing down Matty Campbell. It was just the incessant flashing of the lights. Sorry, that's a very tricky word to say. But why on earth are you flashing, even when they weren't, within overtaking range? It's just constantly on the button, and it was really winding a lot of people up. And I can see why, because if you're De Filippi and you've got Antonio Garcia ahead of you, that's not going to phase him. That you can't really meet someone on the grid who's got more experience of battling right down to the wire, final lap, massive pressure, probably used to fight a train of 5 or 6 GTLMs behind him, not just the one BMW. But, what is this constant flashing going to achieve? And that sort of not unsportsmanlike behaviour, because we do like to see a bit of, mental mind games, whatever, but it really didn't help the case when you then do make a mistake and run into the side of the leader, because no one's going to have any sympathy for you, because it seems fairly malicious. That sort of like, get out my way, I'm quicker than you, I deserve to win. But like I said earlier, BMW were sort of chasing the win for the whole race. So I can see why their drivers might have been a bit frustrated, because I really think they had one of the fastest cars. In terms of if they'd been able to lead, I don't think many other cars would have been able to get by, because they were quick in the corners, but my God, were they quick on the straights. So they would have been able to keep people behind, but they were just never in that position. So I can see the frustration, but I can also see the side of it where I do think it's De Filippi's fault, and I was really sad to see the Corvette's race completely end like that, especially after their fight back. But I really wasn't it wasn't on the level of sort of maliciousness that I was expecting, having seen some of the comments.
Yeah.
That is a very long-winded answer, and I couldn't pronounce a lot of words in that because there are a lot of things to get through. But what do you think, Tim?
No, I completely agree with you. Obviously, I must add that I was asleep in probably the crucial moments that led up to this, and I'm going to get slated for that because I probably missed the most exciting end to Sebring 12 hours in the last half a decade or so. But having watched it back and knowing what I knew from earlier on in the race, with exactly what you're saying about this kind of impatience that the BMW drivers had, this almost like, I need to get past you, but I can't. So I'm getting angry that I can't get past you. So I'm on the button and I'm moving out of line, regardless of if a DPI car is now trying to get past or there's traffic that we're going to have to deal with for the next couple of corners. It was if they knew they had to get in front, but they couldn't. So the drivers were just getting frustrated. I don't know if that's true or whatever, but I know what you mean about this, the reaction post-race from a lot of people, understandably, because an instance decided it, really. It just hinted at this instant being a touring car, bump and run, take out, do or die lunge at the hairpin. Reality, I think it was just hard racing, a little bit too late in the day, trying to make something happen. I think it's a bit unfair to heap this hate on Conor De Filippi, but also at the same time, I get the feeling that this was the first. We talk about it in other series where we talk about the PlayStation generation. We hear this term thrown around, where young drivers who have given their life almost in the junior formula get up to the big leagues and they do not hold any margin of error. They do not leave an inch on track. They're taking absolute maximum apex curb, running all the way out of the line on the exit. They are dive bombing absolutely as late as they can wherever. Part of me feels that this was the first incident in GTLM racing that I feel is almost a bit of that ilk, a bit of, it's not really unsportsmanlike behaviour, but it's almost that, I don't want to say inexperienced, because Conor De Filippi is a good driver. He wouldn't be in that seat if he was a poor racer. But it had that energy about, I need to get this move done. I'm making it happen now. I don't care what happens. I'm going through. I need to win this race. Which, if that comes off, and your name's typically Max Verstappen, it's amazing and you've done it absolutely perfectly. But in yesterday's event, it seemed a bit messy, and I don't know. I don't know if that made any sense, but
no, I completely get you.
Against, especially with Antonio Garcia, like you say, you could, that man could survive months of torture in some prison somewhere, and he wouldn't be phased. He's just a cool head who gets the job done. I don't know. I felt like it had that rushed aspect to time's running out. I need to make a move, which the BMW would have been capable of doing because we know of its straight line speed. I don't know. Bit of a messy one to end that.
It's a shame, really, wasn't it? As well, I think there's two more things to add to this, which is I guess maybe the same ilk, really. BMW are only doing the endurance rounds, so they obviously want to make something happen and they want to have the glory of winning, but what they've actually ended up doing is really completely ruining the fact that they were even present at the event, because all that people are going to remember, and you've got to remember that they're a German brand competing against Corvette, who are going to have legions of fans at the track and watching at home, who are never going to be like, oh, at least he just tried to go for the lead, oh, we love to see a good lead battle at the end. They just want Corvette to win, most likely. So for the Corvette to go from leading after such an incredible fight back to then have nothing, basically, and the Porsche steals the victory, I just thought it was a real shame to end a really, really good race in GTLM. And also, BMW, De Filippi carried on bumping Jaminet for the rest of the lap. When really, I really think you've got to hold your hands up and say, I've done quite a bit of damage already here. Maybe I should just relinquish this. I get that the adrenaline's pumping. He probably thought the Corvette turned in on him or something. Probably the racer in him. I think deep down he probably was thinking, "Oh, what have I done?" But maybe the adrenaline was making him think, "No, I this is still my race. I'm going to win this." But he was still bumping the Porsche after the Porsche had just somehow managed to avoid T-boning him, then had to get out of the way of the Corvette. It was just a very messy way to end the race. And we're all so glad to see BMW still competing with the M8. And the fact that it sort of gets tarnished by that late race, almost unnecessary drama. Obviously, we want to see a great battle for the lead, but I wouldn't really say that was the point in the track where the BMW was most strong anyway. And there was, I know it's a 12-hour race and there's only 8 minutes remaining, but there's still a few more laps. Anything can happen in traffic. The DPIs were battling hammer and tong as well, so they could have come past, whatever the scenario is, anything can still happen. You don't have to, with 8 minutes remaining, you don't have to force the issue that much. But on the other side of it, yes, it wasn't a deliberate takeout and he was fairly alongside. So it's a difficult one to call, but I can see the frustration and it's just a bit of a shame, really.
Yeah,
that's our conclusion, I guess.
Yeah, it was a shame to see it ended that way. Obviously, the Porsche was there. You have to be in it to win it, like we've said, and it was in it and it did win it. You have to be around that area to take benefit from situations like that. I think it was a shame, and I do think that some of the opinionated comment is unfair. It is unjustified to some extent, but also I can see why. It's just a bit of a messy one, isn't it? But it's a shame to see BMW, which was essentially, that car was probably the second fastest car throughout the race. I mean, that car was in second basically the entirety of the event. A shame to see that car, which could have won it, probably should have done if it had kept more clean or just picked a few opportunities here and there. Also survived an incident with the 01 Chip Ganassi car when Scott Dixon tried to dive for pit lane. A very last minute call. Survived that and seemed to pound around and continue. So should we just leave it at the fact it was a shame that it ended like that, but also props to WeatherTech for taking victory.
We've voiced both sides of that fairly well.
We've done a good job.
I don't want to say we've done a good job because some people might be massive Corvette fans who are like, why are you even trying to justify that move or whatever? Yeah. But that's an interesting point. Let us know in the comments what you thought of it, because I guess in terms of a casual fan perspective, that's one of the main talking points of the race. Should De Filippi have gone for it? Whose fault was it? And what did you think of it? Or were you just going to say it was a bit of a shame that we can see both sides of the coin? Anyway, shall we move on?
Fence sitting, boys. Well, just quickly on that, Porsche's 4th win in a row in GTLM at Sebring 12h, which
incredible,
pretty spectacular.
What stat that is?
Big stat, isn't it? Huge stat. So yes, let's go on to DPI, the final class. And if you have indeed listened this far, we need a term that you need to put in the comments. And I'm thinking...
We had David Hanemar Hansen last time.
David Hanemar Hansen, which a few people picked up on, which was great. So if you have listened this far, I think we go with Alan J Automotive Network. Would be great. Obviously a sponsor for the Michelin Pilot Challenge race, but also a banner around the track that always seemed to get picked up by the camera. So Alan J Automotive Network, if you listen this far. So let's get on to DPI
Great
class.
Coverage for them as well. Fantastic coverage for the brand. If you're looking to sponsor a podcast, hit us up.
Yeah. This isn't sponsored by the Alan J Automotive Network, but it could be. Yet, it could be. So let's head on to the final class, which is the DPI, the overall battle. Look, I'll put it like this. Coming into this weekend, if you wanted to place a bet of £5 on a winner, you're probably going to put it on the Wayne Taylor number 10 Acura or the 31 Action Express Wheel Engineering Cadillac. If you wanted a risky bet, you might have put it on the Mazda, obviously winner at the 2020 Sebring 12h, or maybe the 01 Chip Ganassi, Scott Dixon, Renke van der Zande, Magnussen car, if you fancied a risky bet. I don't think anyone would have put £5 on the Mustang sampling JDC Miller Motorsports Cadillac winning that race. I don't think anyone would have done. Honestly, as great as the driver lineup is, Loic Duval, who took victory at the Sebring 12 hours 10 years ago, pretty much to the day, in a Peugeot 908. Tristan Vautier, who had some success in IndyCar, but has found his feet with this squad, and Sebastien Bourdais, who really needs no introduction. Despite that driver lineup, I don't think anyone would have put a fiver on that car winning. Is that the nature of Sebring, or did they get lucky in a little bit? I mean, right at the end, just a little stat. I love these stats. You can tell I've gone through the Alcamel timing results, can't you? But there were 349 laps completed by the DPI class. It took till lap 319 for the number 5 to lead a lap. And across the line, take the checkered flag, it only led 28 laps of the 349 laps completed yesterday. So, can you say it wasn't a contender? Was it a contender? I don't know. Discuss. We saw that car go a lap down. We saw Vautier fighting so hard to keep on the lead lap in the early 2 hours or so. I don't know. It seemed like such a zero to hero race for them.
Yeah, I think, like you said, going into it was an outside bet, but with the race that they had very early on as well, it's pretty, maybe even sort of bordering on the end of the first hour where we saw Vautier almost going a lap down. And I remember you being like, "Oh, Mike, look, he's actually defending from the leading DPI cars." It was something which we were like, it's too early in the race to be doing that, but how it paid dividends, I guess, later on, because the fight back, and we saw so many great fight backs. Unfortunately for people like Corvette, ultimately didn't come off in the end, but we really did. And the right car with the drive-through springs to mind as well. Cars which started well and then had issues and fought back into position. And then once the 5 was out front, I don't think the Mazda really had an answer for it. Obviously, the Mazda didn't qualify very well. It had that sort of stint when the sun was setting of leading, when Tinkner was in the car, Bo Marito was in the car before him doing a really good job as well. But it just seemed like it had the impression it was just keeping those sort of Cadillacs, which were nipping at its heels, at bay, just doing enough. But if it had to chase, then we both said, I'm not sure the Mazda's got the pace. And that's something we saw at Daytona as well. When it was in the lead, it was sort of able to, or when it was leading another car, at least it was able to keep them at bay just about, but it didn't look like it had the out and out pace like it did last year to go and snatch the lead or be aggressive enough. So that was a bit of a shame, but that we were sort of robbed of that final lap drama in DPI, but obviously other classes decided to take the headlines away from them. But yeah, the 5, you'd have to say, probably was a deserving winner in the end, because once they got into that position, they drove really well. The car looked as though it was set up really nicely for the night as well. And the other teams didn't really have an answer for it. And like we keep saying, you've got to be in the fight at the end at races, especially races like Sebring, where, you survive the day to an extent and the night is really make or break, because it is that short stint sprint race that we've come to expect, which is why we see so much drama. But yeah, interesting. It was, like you said, an outside bet going in, and then early in the race you would have, if you'd gone in with your sort of brave bet on the 5 going in, then you would have really been kicking yourself early in the race. But that's what we love about IMSA, isn't it, Tim? Because the nature of it, a car can fight back, the nature of cautions and getting your lap back or whatnot, especially at races like Daytona, it really keeps cars and drivers alive to an extent, doesn't it? And great to see as well Bourdais getting another win. I can't remember the last time he took a victory, but really sort of a long-standing member of the endurance racing community, and obviously a legendary driver in his own right. But great to see him having some success, and just nice to see the team doing some donuts at the end, and really sort of the impression that they've sort of stolen a win, and that they were in position, they made the most of it.
It had a similar vibe. I hate using the word vibe as well, but to the WeatherTech racing victory, a small privateer team going up against the big guns. Here in DPI, JDC are such a small outfit compared to everyone else. Chip Ganassi, I mean, you can't. Chip Ganassi, Wayne Taylor, Maya Shank, these American institutions of race teams. JDC Miller, a smaller outfit, a tiny outfit in comparison, snatching a victory at the end. Gotta love that underdog victory. That's what endurance racing is all about. I think it was interesting with the Mazda because the Mazda car was a lot better at Sebring than it was at Daytona. We know that anyway from its success last season. And going into the night, we saw Mazda, making basically, staking their claim. Look, we're here now. We are actually fighting for this in the second half, really, the final 4-5 hours. Then it got hit by Olivier Pla in the Meyer Shank Racing Acura. Somehow survived what looked like a pretty messy incident. But I wonder whether it was a classic, a symptom of that RT24P that we've seen. When it's a bit chilly, when there are restarts, the Mazdas have struggled to warm the tyres, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong and if this isn't something we've seen, but I feel like that Mazda car has been a bit slow to get going post-restart compared to the Caddies. And I think maybe that going into what was a colder race anyway at Sebring, it was commented about how it was a few degrees colder than they expected. When it came to night time, the Mazda was there, but just a couple of restarts, and then once it'd fallen behind the 5, yellow flag flown, and then the race gets underway again, it's not in a position to retake the lead or really show that pace. I don't know. I feel like that's something we've spoken about as IMSA fans anyway, about the Mazda being slow to get going post restart. But yeah, I'm not saying that that's the reason the number 5 won, because it came back from being turned in what could have been a absolutely massive incident with the number 31 Felipe Nasr at turn 1. That could have been behemoth, and the 5 just seemed to scamper away relatively scot-free and carry on and end up winning the race. I don't. Let's talk about that incident, because that was another one where we saw this turn 1 bump coming into play. The number 5, I believe, exiting pit lane. The number 31 on its first hot lap, or first lap out of the pits, really, tries to stay tight on the way through turn 1 to get past the 5, smacks a bump. Whole car seems to do some sort of pivot on the axis, doesn't it? And somehow Nasr gets the thing gathered up, and only just both of them spin out a little bit. I can't quite believe that incident and the way it played out.
Yeah, like you said, again, it was that pesky bump, which really was getting quite scary at the point where Beret had the accident. It was like, is there a genuine issue here? Because even earlier in the race, I remember seeing that remarkable slow-mo of the Meyer Shank Acura just bumping, and it was like a bucking bronco. It looked like the driver was going to sort of seatbelts come flying off, and the driver would go out of the cockpit, because it was just unbelievable that they were this committed into a corner where the rear end was jumping about so much. But we did really see in the Beret incident that bump, if you hit it wrong, it can really spit you out, and let alone with the number 31 fully committed to the corner and probably spotting the 5 fairly late, or thinking maybe I'm clear of it, or maybe it's going to be clear of me, then ending up being like, oh, it's right there, and I've got to tighten up my line, and I'm already fully committed to this corner, and there's a huge bump here. I remember you saying that it made you flinch even watching on the replays. I'm sure a lot of people had that trackside. A lot of people must have had that even watching the slow-mo replays, because the way the 31 just sort of snapped into the side of the 5, it wasn't just they've sort of met in the middle of their respective lines, and they've sort of come together, and it's a bit of like, it's obviously a very high speed corner, whatnot. No, it was a proper clatter into the side of him, and the angle at which the 31 hit the 5 was such that it was a violent impact, and we saw the damage to the front right tire of the 31, I believe. And it was one of those things where it just fully snapped on him, and he would have been straight into the barrier if the 5 hadn't been there. Who knows, maybe he wouldn't have had the incident. Probably unlikely that he would have had to tighten up his line that much. But still, it was a really violent hit. And one of those ones that I was a bit worried for the wrists of the driver of the 31, because you just think, he had no time to react to the slide, let alone to slide and then have your wrist at an awkward angle and then hit another car, which is always going to be even more violent than hitting a tyre stack. So really violent one to watch and just unbelievable. I remember seeing your tweet about it, it made me laugh. It was absolutely spot on. Proof that we live in a simulation, because there's a 0% chance of that incident happening and both cars coming away relatively unscathed, or at least one of them not having a huge accident. I mean, just remarkable, absolutely incredible that was the outcome, and the 5 still went on to have the race it did and take the win. Like, unbelievable.
Yeah, it was a really interesting incident because it just showed how hard these drivers are pushing. And I think actually this is a good little transition onto the other instance that I think, I don't want to say decided the race, but heavily influenced the DPI battle. The two I'm thinking of are Scott Dixon's pit lane kerfuffle with the 25 BMW and the number 10 Acura. I'm not quite sure who was driving at the time. I think it might have been Albuquerque, taking out or colliding with the Lexus, whilst battling with the Mazda and battling with the 01 car, I believe. So the podium fight in the final 4 or 5 hours. Was that a symptom of drivers giving it everything? Or is there another question mark about pace differences between cars or the relative performances of these cars? The Sebring track? Was it just racing incidents? Am I reading into it? But I felt like there was a couple messy little bits and bobs here and there that actually led to the race swinging the way of the 5 come the checkered flag.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think we're used to seeing a lot of aggression in DPI, but yesterday especially so. When we saw the 31 have that huge hit with the concrete barrier on the inside of Sunset Bend after trying to take the lead very early on in the race. And that to me was, yes, there's traffic, and yes, you've got to be opportunistic and take the chances when they appear, but they were almost blocking the road. Well, they were the GTD cars. I think it was the Heart of Racing Aston, which quite rightly saw a DPI in its mirror and thought, yeah, I'm going to turn in now. And then the gap completely shut for the 31. And it was on such a tight line. I don't think I've seen a car go in that tight ever really, trying to make an overtake like that, because everyone knows that the wall's there. And I remember Van der Zande sort of making a comment saying, well, that wall's been there forever. I don't know why he's really trying to make the move there. Easy to say when you're Renger van der Zande and you can just throw it around the outside of seemingly anyone at turn 1, which, I mean, the level of aggression which you just touched on was just astounding. It was, and in traffic as well, more often than not. With the shot of the Heart of Racing Aston, the onboard they showed of it going innocently into turn 1, just having its own GTD battle, all of a sudden DPI car flings up the inside, Van der Zande's trying to go around the outside, only to find a Porsche's in his way, and then I think it was the 10 at the time ends up retaking the lead, and it was just like, I don't know where to look, and the speed differences were almost scary. Van der Zande clearly had a lot of confidence in that Cadillac to lean on it as much as he did and take that wide line, because we saw him doing it a few times. But yeah, I think there are still times, as much as has become sprint racing, elongated sprint racing, that cliche of, it's not an endurance race anymore. Well, it is, because you can have incidents where if you just think maybe discretion is the better part of valor and just back out of it here and there. I'm not telling drivers how to drive. I'm just saying that it was, as you pointed out, a particularly aggressive race from a lot of the DPI drivers, which ended up costing them victories. The 31 ended up having that incident with the suspension, and it then would have to change its suspension again later in the race. We saw the number 10 heavily defending from the 01 into the hairpin, trying to cover it off when I think it was
and pass Alexis, not only just defend its position, but pass a car in front. It seemed like
exactly.
Anyway.
And the Mazda had just come out of the box and only just cleared the Lexus. So I'm not sure if the 10 was trying to clear him as well, or if he just locked up. But the Cadillac was arriving on the scene at a rate of knots, obviously having done at least one additional lap on its set of tyres, and it was up to speed and up to temperature. But just that sort of feeling of, that was a bit too much. We love seeing these overtaking moves, and we love seeing the best in GT in all the classes. especially in the top class, the fastest cars, going toe to toe and absolutely sending it around traffic because it's spectacular. But also there were incidents yesterday where we just thought, oh, maybe can we tone it down a little bit, because it's now not only scaring us a little bit, but it's ruining some of the races, and then we don't have as many contenders at the end, which is what we all really want to see, as a close finish.
So to add to the TRB In-Lap Podcast driver coaching conversation that you just opened there by suggesting that they're more patient. Look, to add to that, the nature of IMSA races, the nature of the rules regarding caution periods, the likelihood of a safety car with how the racing is playing out on track, these races are not over. And I mean, even the final half an hour, if you make it through to even the last 15 minutes, you stand within a shot of winning it. You know, it only would have taken yesterday for the number 5 car, which had got the lead, the Mazda behind pushing to get past, the 48, which might add the Ally Racing car, which was not going to be dropped to the back of the class because of Simon Pagenaud going 50 seconds over his driver time. That car was third and hounding the Mazda in the final laps. So it only would have taken an incident with all 3 of those for then whoever was in fourth, probably thinking they don't stand a chance, to be winning it. It's just this way of racing. The IMSA races are not over until the final half an hour, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And really, they're really not over until the checkered flag's been waved. I think that is just the nature of the racing that we see. But it has caused a couple of issues, like we touched on, those cars having these messy little cumbersome incidents that, I mean, when ever would you see Scott Dixon doing something like that and going like, oh, that's just Scott Dixon being Scott Dixon? That's not like him. You know, he's trying to pit and he collides with the BMW that's probably being a bit cheeky anyway, sending it kind of slightly back up the inside on the exit of Sunset. But that's not a Scott Dixon incident. That just shows you the level that these guys are trying to achieve and how hard they're pushing. I'd like to add a couple points. Well, actually, one more point, and then I'm going to ask you for your driver of the day and team of the day, if possible. Harry Tinknell, I read, had no radio for the final part of the race and made some calls regarding pit stops, etc., on his own out there on the track. I need to look into this a bit more, but from what I read, he had very limited radio communication with the team, if any. And I think that pays a massive tribute to the level that these sports car drivers are at. They're not just being told what to do. They're not just, hitting a number and lapping to a pace. They're not just being told, right, you've got 45 minutes past the guy in front. They are aware of the race around them. They are calculating what's going on, when I need to be doing this, what numbers are on my dash, how the car is. They've got this awareness. And for Tinknell, who we know is a sports car driver through and through, to be pretty much within seconds of winning the race, despite not having the help from his team because of a radio issue. I think that's pretty spectacular. So let's go on. If you can, driver of the day and team of the day. From yourself, Michael Haffenden.
I would have to say driver of the day for me, Laurens Vanthoor. I was just so impressed with. Obviously, he was up against Ams at the point in the stint that we were watching him lifting and coasting and then controlling the race. But he did his job so perfectly, and I think he's really relishing the challenge of GTD. And it could be quite easy for a driver of his caliber and the races that he's done and the races that he's won to be able to be like, maybe resting his laurels a little bit and be like, it's only GTD. I know that sounds like sacrilege to most of us, but he's a Porsche factory driver. He's probably quite used to teams operating at the highest level, and he could quite easily be like, yeah, I still want to race in him, so I love it, but I really miss driving in GTLM when I was racing against all sorts of factory drivers and whatnot. And of course he still has that to an extent in GTD, but it's a completely different challenge where he's holding off AM drivers behind, lifting and coasting, and like we said, really controlling the race. And that, to me, really felt like it gave the team the boost that they needed to be like, we're in a great position here. We can do this. This isn't just us lucking in while Vanthoor's in the car. We have enough pace across our drivers to be in with a shot of a podium here. And if we really nail it and stay out of trouble, then Just that boost that the pro needs to give. And as much as we say the AM is the deciding element we said it a lot in LMP2 over the years and in GTD as it currently is, it's definitely a case of, yes, that's the case, and it can be the largest factor in terms of, just how much time you gain or lose basically by having the AM in the car. But equally, the pro still needs to do their job, and they need to bring the team morale up, and they need to bring his teammates up to speed. And the fact that you said that his teammates were lapping in the way they were, I just think he's doing a great job and really relishing that new sort of challenge of not handing over to another extremely pro driver, but actually having to really play the team game. Not that he wasn't before, but it just in a very different way, in a pro-am sort of situation. And some drivers don't really like that, and others absolutely love the sort of rewarding level of bringing up your AM driver to have more confidence and seeing them shine as a result of the feedback you've given them. I guess that's a rewarding element of it that maybe Vantel hasn't been able to experience as much because he's been at such a high level. So really like that. And team, I'm going to be called a slate as a Porsche fanboy here, but I think the WeatherTech Porsche and GTLM, I just like the fact that they've got Cooper McNeil in that car, and the fact that they're just the plucky little Porsche taking it to the big guns. But obviously they've got some fantastic drivers. And it also shouldn't be underestimated that they had different drivers for Daytona. I know they had a torrid race there because of the Spengler contact pretty much before the race even got going. But to have new drivers in that car and to produce the result they did by just sort of, they had a strong car, obviously, but they really sort of, like we keep saying, the drinking game, in it to win it.
Yeah.
They did that perfectly, and they did capitalize on incidents. And yes, to an extent, they lucked into it, because if they hadn't had the contact of the BMW and the Corvette, then they probably wouldn't have got the result they did. But that's not to say that they didn't deserve it. And I just think it's a great story for GTLM to have those sort of wins, especially as we're seeing it now in its sort of swan song days.
Yeah.
Cry. But yeah, that's my team and driver.
So
what is yours, Tim?
My driver, I'm stuck because there were so many good performances yesterday, and I think there were a lot of really solid drives that were worthy of the TRB Driver of the Day Tim Fullbrook nomination. A coveted nomination, I must say. A lot of people.
Oh yeah.
I think, to me, someone that stood out again is Renke van der Zande. I think the way that guy can drive, if you're not a manufacturer coming into this next era of racing and you haven't got your blank driver list and you're going, okay, I think that Renke van der Zande guy, he'd be a good shout. If you're not saying that, then you definitely haven't been interested in sports cars, or you're not worried about building a strong lineup. That guy is a seemingly misunderstood or overlooked talent in sports car. He does an amazing job in a Cadillac. I mean, what a combination that is. Renke van der Zande and the Cadillac DPI VR, whatever. Name a more iconic duo. I mean, it's just perfect. Don't know what it is, but really great gyro from him. A big win for that team is coming, and it's going to happen soon. Gutted that he missed out at Daytona. Things didn't go their way yesterday at Sebring. Look down the rest of the races this year. I wouldn't be surprised to see them picking up 2 wins, and indeed probably fighting for the victory at Petit Le Mans come the end of the season. So I think on the basis of another good performance, I'm going to give it to Renke van der Zande, my personal vote. Team, I've got to say Pfaff Motorsports. I would be lying to myself if I didn't give them my vote. Obviously, I was fortunate enough to speak to the drivers before the race weekend, which is a really interesting thing for me. And just the way they are so locked in to just, I mean, they behave as if they are a factory team. They're not. They're a customer team. They buy these Porsches. They stick their stickers on them. They find sponsors, whatever. But they are so locked in on maximising everyone's performance. Zak Robishon did exactly what he needed to do at the start of the race and in qualifying. Okay, following the mistake, he tried to get everything gathered up. He didn't have a big incident in qualifying that could have happened to any other driver. He tried his best and it didn't go his way because of a fault. Start of the race then, switch was flicked and he nailed that to start dragging that car through the order. Lars Kern, again, just seems to get on with the Porsche. Obviously, we know he's a Porsche factory guy. He's an engineer in his day job with Porsche. If anyone knows this car, it's him. But again, solid, no mistakes, doing what needs to get done, lapping, ticking off the stints, not getting involved in silly incidents. And then, of course, Laurens Vanthoor, who needs no introduction, you've already spoken about. So there's the three driver aspect. Then there was making the calls with pitting, getting pit stops done, not getting drawn into incidents, I don't know. There just seemed to be, it wasn't that everything went their way, but it was in the situations where they needed to make decisions, where they needed to perform, they did. And you can't fault them for that. Plus, I like the livery, like we said, and they are just a cool team in general, so they get my vote. So I think let's wrap it up here. This has been another whirlwind tour, whistle-stop tour of the Sebring 12 Hours 2021 on this TRB In-Lap episode. But before we go, Mike, anything you want to add? I think that was another good one we had to speak about.
Yeah, it was brilliant. Once again, everything that we'd come to expect after the Rolex 24 and everything that Sebring always delivers. I think we got more than our fair share of action yesterday, and I'm just looking forward to seeing how the regular rounds of the Championship play out now, because we've got some interesting storylines, and I think, like you mentioned with the 01, like we mentioned with the hardpoint guys, a few people who are looking to make up for lost time or are owed victories or podiums or good results, who will be very eager to make that happen. So not only a great race and great start to the season with the Rolex 24 and 12 Hours of Sebring, but stuff to look forward to as well going forward, which is always nice. So looking forward to it the rest of the year.
Well, thank you very much for joining me, Mike, on another episode of the TRB In-Lap Podcast. I think the next episode will be following on from the 6 Hours of Spa-Francorchamps, the WEC opening round. So we will see you guys then. If you've made it this far, thank you very much for listening. Treat yourself to whatever your favourite tipple is, and a lie down or a walk in the fresh air or whatever you want to do to congratulate yourself on making it through over an hour and a half of Mike and myself rabbiting on about racing. So anyway, thank you very much for listening. Please like and follow and whatever it is on whatever platform you're on. I do really appreciate it, and it doesn't go unnoticed. So thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you next time. So from Michael and myself, goodbye.